audio people? Okay, sounds like we're good. Anyways, as Jason said, my name is Charlie Minato. We have a panel here with a lot more experience about these issues than I do, but the purpose today is going to be to sort of talk to retailers about the future of flavored menthol, more on the combustible side than I think what you guys have heard for most of this morning. And we're going to talk about this as a way sort of for practical advice. So if you're a retailer and you're sort of wondering how much longer can I keep selling these things legally, what might be on the horizon in terms of what these specific changes might be, not just on the federal level, but also on the state and local levels. And we're going to try to put it in language that doesn't have a ton of acronyms and doesn't require a ton of slides with boring language from FDA to sort of explain these things. So with that said, I think we're going to start on the federal side of things. And when this panel was put together, there was some hope, or at least maybe not hope, but the idea was that FDA would have already announced federal bans on flavored cigars and menthol cigarettes. FDA spent most of 2023 saying that those were on the horizon and that they would be announced by the end of 2023. That did not happen. Instead, in December, FDA announced, or not FDA technically, the White House, OMB, announced that it had delayed that. And the best idea we have is that it's delayed at least until March, although there's some debate about that. And so I'm going to open this up just to sort of quick answers from the entire panel, and we'll start with Jessica here to my left. Were you surprised about this delay after we'd heard directly from Bryan King that these were supposed to come this year?
Great question. So no, I was not at all surprised. So having started my career in the federal government at the National Institutes of Health, working closely with FDA and CDC and various federal government entities, that is what happens. And so I was not surprised that it got pushed back. And to be honest, I'm not really anticipating it to come through at all, just because there's so many factors that are involved. There's a lot of feedback coming through to OMB. There's a lot of social justice matters that I think are really being presented and pushing forward to the primary decision makers. I also think there's a political environment where there's going to be kind of great impact if that does go through. But no, I was not surprised. And I do think, though, Bryan did that, you're right, said that on several occasions. And I do think he had intentions, but I think other things have occurred.
All right, different Bryan, and then we'll just sort of go down the panel. Your thoughts, were you expecting this delay?
No, I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, look, FDA said they were going to do it, so you assume they will when they say it. With that said, I've said for a long time that it's a fool's errand trying to predict FDA's timing on anything, yet we all do it, so what does that make us? Do it all the time. But I was pleasantly surprised. In hindsight, though, it makes great sense. Obviously, this is an initiative that would be hugely impactful on a number of key constituencies for this president, and I think the administration is mindful of that, and so it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, well, the experts have spoken on it. The retailer, I'm not surprised by anything the government does, and I'm not surprised by anything a government agency does. So, no, I was not surprised, and I think we're going to see it go on for years.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add, I also wasn't surprised that there's been a substantial delay. I do think, and this goes to all of your engagement if you've engaged on this, as part of the rulemaking process, there was 250,000, I think, public comments submitted, and the vast majority of them, I want to say 98% of them, were causing questions about the ban and some of the unintended consequences. And then follow that up with the OMB has been holding stakeholder meetings. We've done meetings, I know probably a number of your organizations that you're a part of. And again, a lot of those meetings are calling out some of the concerns by it. So, you know, it's part of the process that maybe sometime we take for granted, but I think it's had some sort of impact to at least cause questions and maybe slow down the process and put in the political element on top of that.
All right, so we've heard a few speculations here, but in very brief, sort of give me a month and a date, although Jessica, you said you don't think this is going to happen. If you had to guess, when do you think the federal bans will be enacted? Are we still going with not happening?
Not happening.
All right, Bryan?
After the election, if Biden wins.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Bryan, and I also agree with Jessica, not happening. They're going to kick it down the road.
All right.
Yeah, I guess I'll give an answer. Even if they issue the rule, it'll have a year plus effective date, and then the legal challenges will start, so it'll get tied up in court. So I guess I'm giving a long-winded answer for not happening anytime soon.
All right, so immense optimism here for, I guess unless the FDA is in the room, from our panel. So Jessica, you do a lot of focus groups. I'm wondering, obviously, ENDS products are sort of the future, if not, certainly the present, but definitely seem like they're the future where the energy is. I am curious to know how big of an issue, when you do focus groups, how many people do you find that are smoking menthol cigarettes? It has been mentioned that it is a political issue, and that might be behind the reason for the delay. So I'm curious to know how real you find that to be from a sort of data standpoint.
Yeah, great question. So, so our behavioral science firm, we do a lot of focus groups. We do a lot of survey data across the United States and internationally, and collect the data, as you say, Charlie. And when we think about prevalence, or we think about the percent, likelihood, or how much is happening, it really depends on the questions that are being asked. So when we look at, as mentioned before, the federal government surveys that are, telling us the prevalence and how many people are smoking menthol cigarettes or flavored cigars, again, it really depends on, is it 12% who have done it, over the past year, or is it 2% that do it every day some days? What we typically see is somewhere in the middle. We see roughly, I would say, 40% of our samples, and we have thousands and thousands and thousands of consumers across the U.S., to support PMTAs and FDA applications, and I would say 40% are smoking menthol cigarettes. And when we do look at data combined, not just ours, it typically falls within the non-Hispanic Black population. And I have done a lot of research with them, and a lot of them say, and I think we'll get to it later, which is, don't take my menthol cigarettes away from me. That is the one thing that gets me through the day and that I enjoy. And so that is very real. And then when we look at the flavored cigars and who's most likely to be using those and what is our data showing, that's really among, the younger populations. When we look at little cigars, cigarillos, but then again, if you're not asking the questions, you don't understand the full context there. And that full context brings in the fact that they're using that to smoke marijuana a majority of the time. And so we have, it's a lot, it's really complex. It has a lot of variables involved, and so yes, we collect the data, but we got to be able to then tell the story behind the data.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, Terry, let's say I give up this whole cigar blogging thing. I open up a smoker-friendly franchise in Dallas. I'm a retailer now, which is scary. What should I be concerned about in terms of, we obviously heard there's a year implementation period is what FDA has said, although we did just spend 5 minutes talking about how FDA said things and didn't do it. But FDA has said that if they enact the rule tomorrow, that would mean, January 31st, 2025 would be before it would be illegal for me to have flavored cigars, menthol cigarettes on my shelves. But what do I need to be focused on right now on the federal level?
So I thought I'd throw out a kind of an interesting stat that NAC's data came out, National Association of Convenience Stores, this week, and they said that in their data, menthol was 34% of the market, and 51% of flavored cigars are sold in C-stores, and it's a $24 billion market. So it's pretty substantial. So I guess to answer Charlie's question as a retailer, I think number one, you stay focused on what you're doing day to day. That's the most important thing, because you really don't have a lot of impact as a single store operator or chain store operator. So number one, make sure that you're really doing a good job running your stores. Then as it starts to come down the pike, I think you take a look at what are your alternatives that you can bring in to potentially bolster the sales in your stores that take the place of flavored products that might be going off your shelves. And so you start to look out, forward thinking about what you sell in your stores. You know, in our stores, we've added a lot of different alternative products, whether it be kratom or CBD or depending on the state, it might be Delta products that kind of bolster it, a lot of glass product, and certain really categories and sections within our stores to highlight that. So our stores don't look like a head shop, but they do offer alternatives. And then you have to start to look as the day starts to get closer. What are you doing with your inventories? How are you going to manage that inventory as you start to look to eliminate it from your shelves, selling it through? Hopefully there is a year sell through, and I think that most people think there will be. I think that you know, you have to be very aware of who your manufacturer and distributor partners are, so that if you have to return products, that you got a good partner that's willing to help you remove those products from your shelves. Hopefully you get some sort of return. You know, we're really vetting our different distributors and manufacturing partners so that we do have, you know, solid relationships there. And you have to have, you know, really good line of communication with those folks so that you know, you protect yourself as you get closer and closer to a ban. So.
All right, so one last thing I think on the federal stuff before we move on to the more localized stuff. Bryan, we're going to talk about your favorite topic, suing the government here. It is widely expected that whether it's with menthol cigarettes or flavored cigars, that whenever FDA enacts the finalized rules, that there will be lawsuits. Could you give us I didn't go to law school, but the 60 to 120-second rundown? What do you think these lawsuits are going to center about, knowing that they might be, you know, very different lawsuits depending on the product category?
Yeah, asking a lawyer to describe these lawsuits in a minute or two, that's a challenge.
I don't think we have the budget to pay your hourly fee.
Oh, sure you do. So I will make a bold prediction without revealing any client confidences that there will be lawsuits challenging these measures if and when they go forward. So look, one thing you have to understand about federal regulations is a big part of a litigation challenge depends on the agency's justification for the rule and how the agency responds to comments that are made during the rulemaking period. That is why your comments are so important. What will happen is if and when these rules go forward, lawyers for industry will be looking at FDA's justification for that rule, including how it responded to comments. And that's a part of any litigation challenging federal agencies' rules. So part of this is undetermined until FDA actually issues the rule. But you can draw clues based on potential comments that industry has made in the rulemaking process. And those are likely, they give you some insight as to what litigation challenges will be. Obviously, a common theme in the comments is that in menthol's case, it is not it's not an inherently dangerous, a more dangerous ingredient in cigarettes. And that's an important part of FDA's consideration in whether it can issue a so-called tobacco product standard. Another point, as Terry alluded to, FDA has a statutory obligation to consider two things that are crucial. One, economic impacts, and of course those impacts here would be devastating. And two, which is part and parcel with economic impacts, FDA has a legal obligation to consider the potential for contraband trade. And I think everybody agrees that if and when a menthol ban or a characterizing flavors in cigars ban is implemented, the contraband trade is not a likelihood, it is a certainty. There are plenty of examples of that with statewide bans, and it'll be interesting to see how FDA wrestles with that issue. In my mind, they haven't adequately grappled with it thus far.
All right, so one last thing before we move on to the state bans. Let's try to explain Chevron to someone that didn't go to law school here. So you may have seen in recent weeks that the Supreme Court took up a case involving some fishermen from the New England area They have sued over a regulation that requires government officials to be on their boats to prevent overfishing, and they have argued that the government may have the ability to put them on the boats, but doesn't have the ability to, the government agencies, more precisely here, since we're about to have an attorney correct me, that the government agency doesn't have the ability to unilaterally decide how much money to charge them. And they have sued over this. It has gone to the Supreme Court. How is this at all relevant to tobacco and menthol cigarettes, Bryan?
Thanks, Charlie. Now you're really letting me geek out here on the legal stuff, but as simply as I can. So the whole question before this U.S. Supreme Court is whether to overrule the so-called Chevron doctrine. And what that concept says is when a federal agency is interpreting a law that it enforces that is considered to be ambiguous, if that agency's interpretation is reasonable, courts will defer to it. And what it seems like is that the Supreme Court is inclined to overrule that concept so that agencies will not receive that deference in interpreting a law that it enforces. Now, how does that apply here? Difficult to say. I will say certainly if the Supreme Court overrules Chevron, it will be atmospherically helpful because it signals that courts will not give agencies sort of a blank check and say, oh, okay, you're the FDA, for example, you must be right. How that applies in practice, I don't know, and that will depend ultimately, again, on FDA's rulemaking. If they say, for example, under the law, we have to evaluate whether this standard is quote-unquote appropriate for the protection of public health. What does that mean? If FDA offers an interpretation of that concept, that wouldn't necessarily get deference if the Supreme Court overrules Chevron. Hopefully that was simple enough.
I mean, I think that's all we got. So we're going to move on to the state stuff and hopefully less legalese, at least for the moment. So there are 2 states that have already banned the sales, at least certain sales, of flavored cigars and or menthol cigarettes. Massachusetts and California, which I'm sure is surprising to many of you in the audience. And the bans are not identical, and the response that we've seen from retailers in those 2 states have been different. Terry, you have franchise locations in both states. I'm curious to know when those bans got enacted on the statewide level, how did your stores react as far as you're aware of?
So, yeah, we have licensee dealers in both California and Massachusetts, and basically, you know, they started preparing for the date by eliminating products off their shelf, trying to get their inventories down so they didn't get stuck with products that were contraband or illicit. So what it really did was it forced business, especially Massachusetts, out into New Hampshire and Rhode Island. There's a lot of cross-border trade, a lot of border stores, a lot of black market. It impacted their stores in a pretty significant way in terms of lost sales. And in fact, anecdotally, one of our dealers told me that they have a store clerk that buys Newports on the street for $25 a pack. So that's kind of taken advantage of the smoker. The smoker's going to smoke, I think, and they're going to find their product. So. The thing that really, I think, hurts them, and we found this back in 2009 when FDA first took effect and we had to take a number of products off the shelf, is that there's a lot of outlaws in the retail business that continue to sell those products, and there's not a lot of enforcement action either at the state, local, or federal level to come in and protect the legitimate retailers. So we see our consumers go down the street, and that takes a market basket with them, and they go to these illegitimate retailers, and it happens in New York City with backpack sellers and bodegas that are selling products after hours when the state enforcement or the city enforcement are done for the day. They bring out their products and bring them over the counter. So the biggest thing is really how it forces the consumer to look to to either go cross-border or looking for black market products, and it definitely impacts legitimate retailers and their ability to see the revenues that they had, before it happened. So.
All right, so while the panel is, I'd say, pretty skeptical that the federal bans may actually happen, I don't think that any of us are going to be surprised when there's another state that becomes a third state, the fourth state, et cetera, to ban flavored cigars or the sales of menthol cigarettes. Jessica, I'm curious, in your research, have you gotten any indication about where we might see those next, or where consumers are concerned about, in particular, seeing statewide bans next?
Yeah, so, and I guess, I think as a psychologist, what we probably should have done so that there's not reverse psychology from the FDA is said that we think the ban's gonna happen tomorrow, because now we've all gotten up here and said it's not gonna happen. So, and I think we can take and get a glimpse from, the Tobacco 21. So I guess Hawaii was the first there. I would say Illinois would be coming next. Pennsylvania, New York. So when we go out to consumers, it's really interesting because when we go to smokers, and especially if we're dealing with flavored e-vapor, e-cigarette products, which is what a lot of our business is, we can't go to sites that we used to go to because the specific localities, and I know we'll get there, have flavor bans, right? And we can't bring that in for consumers. So that's made it very difficult and can make it challenging to find our samples for these studies. So we're not even talking to those people, right? Because they may be using the flavored products because we all know that they can still get them, to Terry's point. But I think what's also interesting is that they really have no idea that there's potential in the other states for flavors to go away if there's a federal ban. So that isn't really top of mind for a lot of them. They just said, okay, well, I'm gonna get my cigarettes, I'm gonna get my menthol cigarettes, I'm gonna get my flavored e-vapor cigarette products, and I'm gonna find a way. So I hope that answers your question.
It's a start. In Hawaii and Illinois would not surprise any of the panel. Terry, do you have franchises in Hawaii, or?
We do not, no.
There's my future. All right, Bryan, back to your favorite topic.
I was going to add one other state that's actually really popping right now, and that's the state of Vermont, which is neighboring to Massachusetts. They're actually, it's already passed one chamber, and I think there's a committee vote today on a total ban of flavored tobacco products. They've changed some of the dates, but that's a severe threat up there.
All right, Bryan, back to your favorite topic, suing the government. In the case of California, there was a lawsuit about California's ban, and it had, I would say, moderate success. It delayed the ban in part, and then there was some other action. However, ultimately, the Supreme Court declined to take up a lawsuit that was, at least in title, spearheaded by RJR. I'm not sure who exactly paid the most for that, but it was an RJR filed, or they were the chief name on the lawsuit. The Supreme Court declined to take that up, and that was a lawsuit that dealt with whether or not states had the ability to actually enact flavor bans. Do you want to explain that, while there may be some hope on the federal level, on the statewide level, it does seem like trying to get the Supreme Court to overturn those bans may not be a very fruitful endeavor, seems like?
Yeah, well, so for the record, I don't like to talk about cases where the industry lost. A glimmer of hope, I'll say, for sure. Look, the Supreme Court's decision not to hear a case is not dispositive of anything. The U.S. Supreme Court hears a very, very, very small percentage of cases that litigants ask it to hear, including cases where there are really good arguments. So the fact that the Supreme Court didn't hear the case is not dispositive. With that said, I'd be a liar if I didn't acknowledge the fact that there are not favorable precedents out there on this issue at the state level. It's not just California. A number of decisions from different circuit courts of appeal have not sided with industry on these state level bans. With that said, I still think there are credible arguments out there, including based on federal preemption, the U.S. Commerce Clause, that could still be pursued, and I think will be pursued in the event of other state-level bans.
All right, so you brought up preemption, which is an awesome transition here. So we're going to get down to the local level, not necessarily about federal preemption. There have been successful instances, I would say most notably with Philadelphia and then very recently in the state of Ohio, where the state legislator has included something known as a preemption clause, which prevents local governments, so cities and counties, from enacting laws that are stricter than state laws. In the case of Philadelphia, what this meant is the city of Philadelphia tried to, when they were banning like large soda drinks, you guys remember that? They also tried banning the sale of menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. They were sued by a number of organizations, and they ultimately lost in federal court because the state of Pennsylvania says that cities like Philadelphia cannot create laws that are stricter than state laws. Terry, we're going to go back to you. Or actually, Bryan, before we get to Terry, do you just want to sort of explain the basics of preemption clause? Have I left anything out there?
Yeah, no, I think you actually got it, Charlie. That was
Glad
great.
I'm 1 for 5.
Really simply, there's two questions when a locality tries to enact any kind of law restricting the sale of tobacco products. One, does the locality actually have this authority under state law? And two, has at the state level, has the legislature enacted a law that limits that authority? And I think those principles are relatively straightforward in these locality cases.
All right, so Terry, if I've got a cigar or a smoker-friendly franchise, I guess I'm in Hawaii now, and I want to try to get this preemption clause passed, which seems rough in the Hawaii legislature, but let's say I wanted to, what are some advice that you would have if I'm just a single store operator, maybe I got 2 franchises, about where to start? Because it does seem sort of daunting to, I'm going to go down to the state capitol and meet with somebody to try to get laws changed?
That's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to have to find a friendly legislator who is willing to carry a bill. So, you know, as a single store operator, I think the first thing you do is you try to get a coalition of some of your competitors. You have a number of operators that are competing with you that have the same interests and would you know, gain the same sort of victory by getting that preemption. So you want to get that coalition. You want to find a friendly legislator that understands what the impact is and why you're doing that. You have to explain your case to them, and then you have to really, as retailers, I think you have to get your consumers active and get them in action and empower them to get behind you, because it's in their best interest too, because they're ultimately are the people that are driving the sale of these products because they want to use them. So it's kind of 3 steps, I think, to do that. And we had preemption in Colorado, and the state, someone brought a bill to the state to take preemption out, and it passed. And so we had the opposite of preemption happen, and what that allowed local cities and towns to do is not only, you know, ban certain products, but also enact their own excise tax on cigarette and tobacco products. And we had a certain mountain town that kind of followed suit behind Aspen and did both flavor bans and a significant local tax, and that particular store of ours lost 80% of its sales. So it was very impactful. It's a big hit. And that consumer base, they didn't quit smoking. They went down the valley, and we had a store that was just west of there, outside of that city limits, outside of that county, and the business in that store, you know, went up probably 50%. So it's not a case of, these are really nannies that think that they're going to help their constituents, that it's their job to make them healthier citizens, and it's just nannyism run amok. So.
And is this something where you think our friends at NATO or CAA or NACS might be helpful in terms of trying to get some assistance there?
Yeah, I mean, we always we spend a lot of time with our friends at NATO and at NACS and with Sigma and with the Energy Marketers of America, about all the trade groups, PCA, CAA. We stay super engaged by really calling on them to help us with the data points that they have, and they have a lot of experience in other markets that we might not be in, and they have a roadmap on how to really go down that path in terms of trying to protect your business. So I think it's super important to work with your trade associations.
All right, so Jessica, Terry mentioned data there. If I'm a single store operator, I got my location in Hawaii now, I'm not a statistician, I'm not a researcher like you. How can I, as a retailer, get data from my consumers that would be persuasive to government officials?
Yeah, so I think right now there's a gap between organizations like Terry's and organizations like ours. So we're both collecting data, like we're both obtaining information from consumers, as well as you as retailers out there. What amazes me in working with retailers is you all become part of these potential, cigarette smokers that transition to, say, flavored e-vapor products or any e-vapor product, but you become part of their story, right? And you see them progress through that process. And I definitely think, as you just asked Terry, and Terry responded, that retailers being able to talk to them about, yeah, we're gonna go to the legislators. Like, you have a voice, right? You can vote in the next election. You can go and talk to the legislators who are on your side and also not on your side, and tell them your story. On our side, we are meeting with the smokers. We're meeting with the same consumers that are coming to retail shops, but we're doing it from a different perspective, right? So, maybe manufacturers have hired us to do product development, innovation, right? And we ask smokers, we ask consumers, is this a product that you like? What don't you like about it? Or we're going to smokers and we're asking if this product can get them to switch, and we're giving it to them for 6 months or whatever. So through that, our focus is on getting the voice of the consumer, being empathetic with the consumer, but delivering the data ultimately to a manufacturer to then an application. We aren't contracted to tell them, hey, there's a potential flavor ban in your state or, in your locality or at the federal level. And if we were, I can't imagine their reactions. And so I would say 1 out of 8 people, when we sit down and talk with them, will know something that's happening at the federal level, state level, local level, and they'll know it, but it's in an interesting way. They'll say something like, aren't they trying to get rid of these things? Is that why I'm here? I didn't think these things were legal. And it's very interesting to see how they respond. We're not there to say, yeah, actually, the federal government's trying to take these away completely and you won't have your products that get you through the day. We can't say that because that's not what we're hired to do. But imagine if there was, if we were contracted, right? Or if these organizations could work with Terry's team and other organizations to, when we're having the conversations with consumers, say, you know what? You have a voice. Like, this actually might happen, and you guys need to step it up and take action, right? So again, there's this gap in between, and so Terry's organization and similar organizations have a huge voice at the legislative level, and talking with, being a constituent and having a voice. On our side, we're seeing the same thing, but imagine if we came together, it'd be double the voice, right? Double the responses on the ballot, double the marching down at Capitol Hills, and we combine that with retailers. I think that's where the biggest impact can be made.
All right, so Jason, I don't know, I think we may have taken all the microphones to prevent a Q&A. I don't know. All right, well, we figured that out. I'm gonna ask the panel one last question. I'm gonna put you on the sort of Bryan rules. So 60 seconds or less here. We'll start all the way at the end down there. One piece of advice you give to the retailers in the room about how to succeed selling flavored cigars, menthol cigarettes legally, given the sort of murky climate that might be ahead of us here.
Yeah, I would just say stay engaged, right, with your legislators. It's resonating somewhat with the delay, and I know it can seem monotonous, that this has been dragged on and on and on, but all the more reason that in some way it's working. So stay in contact with your officials, not just on the federal level, but also, as we've talked about here, the state and local authorities are trying to ban flavors as well, so you need to definitely have relationships with them. And quite frankly, they listen to you guys who have footprints in their districts, who are employing, contributing to the bottom line of the economy with jobs, tax revenue, that sort of thing. So takeaway is stay engaged.
Yeah, totally agree. I think you have to stay engaged on that side. We do business in 13 states, so we can't be at every city council meeting or at every state house. So we have to call on our district supervisors or area managers or our store managers or store personnel, to be present at those city council meetings to let them know that we're a business person, we're a business in their community. It's very important. And I also think go back to, as a retailer, really, keeping your mind on the ball when you're operating your business, really having those communications and relationships with the manufacturers and your distributors, and really running a good operation so that you really can be resilient when things do happen that can impact your business as we get down the road.
I'll say, as it pertains to potential federal bans, don't panic. And as you've heard from us, I think there's reason for some optimism. Whether this goes forward is uncertain. On this date, January 31st, I've predicted for you that there will be an industry challenge if it does go forward. And I think if a challenge occurs, I think it would have a reasonable likelihood of success. And one thing that federal courts have to look at in these challenges is the likelihood of irreparable harm, which is quite certain here. And I don't think FDA or the Department of Justice lawyers could credibly argue about it. So I would say there would be a good probability that any ban would be enjoined by a federal court, at least for a reasonable period of time.
I think I would agree with most of what everyone said. I think that don't give up and be there and continue to be there for your consumers. And as I just said, you've seen a lot of their journeys. I do think you have a huge role at being able to communicate to them that they also, again, I keep saying a voice, but they have a voice, and being open and realistic with them to say, your freedom and your choice to choose the consumer product that you want to use may go away if you don't take action. And the U.S. in particular, I know, is what we have focused on, but it's been pretty amazing what we have been able to do when we come together as a team and as a large group. We can make systematic change. And I know, again, this panel was really focused on the future of flavors in the U.S., but I am really hopeful that globally and internationally, the role of flavors can really continue to put a footprint in and demonstrate how we can continue to switch smokers and continue to be successful as retailers and as manufacturers and consultants and everyone that's here in the room.
Yeah, Charlie, I would also mention, if you think about federal action, the Corrective Statements Act was filed in 1999, and that wasn't resolved until last year. So, that was, 24 years.
We have time for a few questions for the panel from the audience. Anyone have a question you want to ask anyone on the panel? Back here.
If, with the advent of flavors, are you looking at offering, especially in the retail market, are you offering or telling stores that may be looking at hemp products or hemp type of cigarettes in a way? And is that something you're looking at for the future?
Is that to me? We definitely have looked at, a lot of alternative products and have tried, multiple brands in that category. I think that, as a retailer, you have to look at what are your options, what can you sell through your doors, and that is, legitimate and legal and makes sense for your business. So yeah, you started with an end to flavors. I don't think there's going to be an end to flavors, but I think that you still want to look at what the alternative products are, and there's a lot of opportunity, in this show today to look at what kind of innovation is going on out there and what potentially, you can add to your shelves that, you know, create maybe a larger market basket on a daily basis for your, you know, your consumer. So I'd say definitely, you know, look at those alternative options.
Time for one more question. In the back. We good?
I have a question for you. And this is, you know, I go to a lot of conferences and I listen to a lot of scientists and attorneys talk, and I've seen Dr. King speak probably 5 times in the last year. And so I have a question, and I'm not a, you know, I'm just a retailer, so I'm not the smartest guy in the room here, and I'm not a very good mathematician, but they keep talking about the 26 million submissions that have come in. And it's been over the course of about 6 years. And so I just was doing a little bit of math. That's like 261 working days a year for the federal government, not giving them any holidays. So over the course of that time, that's 1,827 days and 26 million submissions. So they say that they're 96% through the submissions, and it's my understanding that a SKU submission is fairly substantial for each SKU, I mean, multiple pages. So they would be in my archaic math, they would be getting through 14,230 submissions a day to be at 96%. How's that possible?
Well, they did a lot of, if you didn't have a signature here or an incorrect signature, it literally just got swiped away, or if you didn't have the fatal, you know, the fatal flaw assessment that came through. So there was a lot of reviewing applications, and literally if you did not make the mark in pretty ridiculous ways, they didn't even review it. So I would probably cut that down by half, even, I don't know, 70%, and then you're looking at whatever that is, because I'm archaic math too, Terry. But I think that was reduced significantly, whether or not that was, you know, unlawful or incorrect, but it was.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there was, I think, one notable example of a company, I think it had like 1 million or so submissions on its own, and those PMTAs were denied en masse, I think, because they didn't have an environmental assessment. With that said, I think it's also fair to say that FDA, as some federal courts have acknowledged, may have gone through some of these a little bit too quickly, including by saying that it would not review things that it previously said were important. So it maybe some of that's a result of going through these submissions a little bit too quickly and overlooking key evidence.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.